In the world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized, just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're insuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description. Have you ever thought about firing a patient? You know you have. Well, if you want to know when and how, stay tuned. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Welcome back to the podcast. We've got a fantastic guest today that some of you may know because she's got a pretty significant online presence. She's well known in the physician legal space. We have Amanda Hill, who's a healthcare attorney in Austin, Texas. She worked for the U.S. government defending large hospitals before becoming general counsel for several large groups. She owns Hill Health Law Group, focusing extensively on representing doctors. And she's worked with physicians and healthcare management in healthcare management her entire career, providing guidance, training, and counsel. And in 2022, she launched Guard My Practice to try and prevent our problems and help educate us before they happen. And so she has this to help us with the business side of medicine through her online platform. So Amanda Hill, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. There's nothing that I like more in the world than talking to doctors. So here I go. I love sharing the wisdom that I've learned. And there's just been a lot of horror stories that I've seen in my life, Bradley. So it's nice to reminisce on some of them and hopefully prevent them from happening to your listeners.
That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about prevention. And
right.
So one of those things to prevent problems might be firing a patient. And this was actually a request that wanted to be anonymous. So we'll leave it at that. But someone requested this specific thing. And it's something that I've certainly wondered about in the past. So
right.
Firing a patient, or as we talked about earlier, terminating or ending the doctor-patient relationship with the patient. All of
right.
these are, they'll be interchangeable terms.
It's not something that you set out to do, right? I mean, you're a physician, you want to treat patients, you want to have these robust relationships. You have stars in your eyes that all of your patients will love you and, appreciate your guidance and follow your wisdom. And lo and behold, human beings are not always pleasant. And there are a few that you are going to want to get rid of, as far as your patient goes. It's human nature. And I've never had a client that has not at least once or twice terminated a patient from their roster. Termination is strong. We're not killing patients. We're just telling them they're not a good fit. But I think my overarching first statement about, terminating a patient is it's going to happen. So let's just normalize that you're not a bad doctor. There's nothing wrong with you. Certain people are so difficult that they're like a cancer in your practice. They set foot in the door and you dread seeing them, that you hate the follow-up. They're nasty to your staff. They treat you one way. They treat your staff differently. They, barrage your portal with messages. It's just not worth it. Right? I mean, life is just too short to have to deal with this constant negativity and toxicity from one person. So yeah, sometimes it's really necessary to pull the plug for your own sanity and to support your staff, right? To say, we're not going to put up with this abuse.
So we actually put up signs in our office, and I had actually taken these from the signs that are around one of my hospitals, NYU affiliate, NYU Long Island, and it said but their language that was certainly more aggressive, like threatening language and, abuse and physical intimidation will not, something like, I'm paraphrasing here, are completely unacceptable and don't fit with our healing environment. And so, you will be removed if something like this, the potential for litigation or,
right.
real press charges, something like that, like real threatening, a little aggressive. We decided to turn it down a little bit, and our staff, they really appreciated those signs being up. I mean, it's a little sad that we needed to do that. That's the state of things. I mean, COVID, I think really things started happening on airplanes that really didn't happen that frequently before. So I think everybody's dander was up, and apparently it hasn't really come back down because we're still having those aggressive situations. So I think, if someone is physically threatening your staff and intimidating them, that to me seems pretty clear cut. But let's
Right.
talk about the gray area, right? Like,
Yeah,
what
that's where
is
most of them
reasonable?
live. Well, first of all, as counterintuitive as it may be, my big piece of advice for doctors is it's like a breakup. It's like, it's not you, it's me. It's just not a good fit. It doesn't have to be toxic because I think a lot of physicians want to blast off a letter to the patient saying, you intimidated, you used language we don't like, you did this and this. And what you're doing by sending that sort of inflammatory letter is making it worse. And you're
Yeah.
sometimes encouraging them to go straight to the medical board or Yelp or Medscape or whatever and leave bad reviews. And then you've got more problems. So look, your goal is to get this patient out of your practice. And so the way to do that is to send, I hate to say nice letter, but a letter that says, it's just not a good fit. I just don't think our practice can serve you in the way that you would like.
I have the skills and knowledge available for what you require, and I don't think we can help you serve your healthcare goals.
That's right. And as dumb as that sounds, that really does, tone down the rhetoric, because what you don't want to do, you don't know if this person has a personality disorder or if they thrive on conflict. Some people get a kick out of pissing off a doctor. It's true. I see it all the time. So you don't want to inflame that and make it worse by writing this nasty letter that they're going to publish or put online. You don't know what they're going to do with the letter that you write. So it's really important, I think, to send a neutral letter. And I oftentimes tone those down, even though inside you can call me, you can gripe all day, tell me how terrible they are. You want to beat them in the face? Fine. But don't put that in the letter because your staff, all they need to know is I'm not going to let you be abused by patients. I'm supporting you. You're right. This person is not a good fit for our practice, and I'm going to let them go. And that's all the staff cares about. So make sure that when you write those letters, you don't use it as like a revenge plot. You just want to get rid of them, so they don't become a horrible cancer to your life. Same thing goes, with board complaints. They're very similar to, when you're terminating a patient, it's usually a very angry patient. So you're afraid they're going to sue you, or you just don't like them, or they're abusive to your staff. Also, those types of people file online complaints against you. They go to the medical board and file complaints against you. Right? Those types of personalities that are like out to get you are going to try to get you in many ways. And I think that the advice is strong across the board, right? Which is don't get defensive, be rational in your response, organize your thoughts to where you're like, I did the standard of care. I did nothing wrong. Here's why. Let me explain it to you. It's tough because I don't think doctors know when to draw the line. They're like, well, I'll see him again. I'll try one more time. They don't want to send a patient away. But sometimes it's for your own sanity.
So let's, like we were saying, we live in that gray area. So what are some examples that you can think of, reasonable times to terminate the relationship?
Sure. Well, obviously, if they're like just nasty and they're cursing out the staff, a lot of times there's a Jekyll and Hyde, right? They're very rude to staff and they're very nice to the doctor. So the doctor's like, I don't see what you're seeing. It's this sweet old lady. Like, she calls every day. She, berates us if we don't pick, get right back to her. So there's that dichotomy of like, well, she's nice to you, but she's a terror to your whole entire entity. And that's a gray zone you got to pay attention to support your staff. I think another gray zone, a lot of doctors are like, look, if you're on Coumadin, for example, and you never come back for checks and you don't follow my advice and every time it's a war and I tell you that we think a medication's recommended and you flat out say no. I mean, it's just, this isn't working. Sometimes it's not about being nasty and gross and this terrible person that you have to terminate. It's just they're so non-compliant that you're worried that something is going to happen to them because they're just not following your advice. And you've talked to them, and they won't listen or they laugh at you and they say, oh, doc, I know you have to say that, but I'm going to do this other thing that's really going to hurt me. Sometimes doctors feel really uncomfortable with that. And every physician has their own comfort level, on I can't have you take this really dangerous med if you're not going to come in. Same with pain management, right? If you're not going to come in for a drug screen and urine screens, then I'm not going to keep prescribing this and you're going to be gone out of my practice. So I think you have to listen to that.
In some of their heads is I don't want to make this someone else's problem. Like they walked in my door and therefore they are my responsibility. And if I terminate the relationship, they're going to become like my colleague down the street's problem. And she's an awesome person and an awesome doctor. And I don't want this person plaguing her. So I will just handle this. Like I think how some of us are thinking. I hope how some of us.
Well, that's very sweet and generous of you. But, at the end of the day, a lot of times those termination letters are put in the chart. And it's very obvious to another physician later that, oh, this person was terminated. This letter that says you need to find another doctor within 30 days, kind of signals to the next provider that this has been a problem. And, I get the feeling that you don't want to pass the buck, especially if you have like a large multi-specialty group. You certainly don't want to like pass it to your partner, that you work with in the same entity. I get that. But I wish the doctors would sort of be a little more self-focused on that and say, look, this is ruining my life. This is ruining my staff's life. I dread this person. They don't listen to me anyway. This is just like any relationship. I want doctors to start thinking of that. This is a relationship that you have with your patient, and if it's not working, at some point you have to draw the line and cut it off, because otherwise some people continue to suck just constantly. They just suck your time. They suck it's like vampires. They suck suck you dry. And if you don't stop that, then they'll never stop taking. And I think that doctors are so kind, and they take calls and they respond to emails on the portal, and they do. And sometimes they give their cell phone number, and then they're like, I regret that, and some patients just don't know the boundaries. And so I think part of it is just setting healthy boundaries. And I wouldn't worry too much about the next person, because that next person has the ability to terminate them as well. They really do.
Yeah. So then there's also a question of different styles. And so we're going to, do the two different styles. So let's say you're a kind of a laissez-faire doctor. You're like, you tend to give a lot of reassurance. You're not very heavy on testing. You're not very heavy on intervention, but the patient really requires your reassurance. And so they're in your office all the time. They're demanding tests, labs, imaging. And for stuff that you're like, listen, I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. We'll make sure that it's getting better. If it's not, we can get imaging then. And they're like, no, I need it now. Like, so there's that one in that direction. And the next question is going to be, well, it also occurs in the other direction. So let's start with that one. They're just being very demanding. Again, it's more boundaries. They're not respecting your boundaries on what you deem as appropriate medical care.
Well, I think that is something that doctors need to learn. And that is a learned skill, first of all. I mean, when you're in residency, you don't get a lot of this teaching, on how to set these boundaries and how to really interface with these patients. You come out with a clinical skill and you have a style that you don't even realize, and you just assume your patients know it. So part of this is just explaining to your patients how you operate. I don't believe, in fact, I heard my OB say that I don't need to test you for this particular issue. I can see from your clinical symptoms, testing seems like a waste of time. We need to go to this direction. Okay. She explained that to me. And if that's not the type of doctor that I want to see, and I want to get tests every week out of sort of my own anxiety, then that's something that you can have a conversation about with your patients, right? This isn't the style that I have. If you want constant testing, that's not how I operate. That's not how I focus my practice. I think it's a waste of money and it's a waste of time. And so I have testing periodically when I think it's valuable, but you have to sort of set that tone with your patient. And trust me, if you're like hot out of the box with a patient where they're like bucking you from the get-go, that's an awkward start. And you might even say to them, like, I don't know if I'm the right fit for you.
This is where that letter actually is exactly what you're thinking, which is
100%. You're like, this is a train wreck.
On my staff. Yeah,
exactly. So I think it's okay to say that too. Sometimes patients will say, okay, you're right. I don't like this style. I want to have a different process. And that's okay. It's like, let's normalize that. This isn't a good fit. Just like you go on a date with someone when you're in your 20s and you go, you're not a good vibe. There's no, chemistry here. I don't like being around you. Same with your doctor. You have to just be honest and say, look, if this isn't the style that you're comfortable with, there's a lot of other doctors that might be able to do that. It's just not the way I operate. It's like, you don't have to change your style because this patient doesn't like the way you work.
And so then I would imagine it works in the other direction too, right? Like I'm not going to say that the doctor's very heavy on intervention, but like to your point, the Coumadin patient, right? You're making these recommendations for follow-ups that they don't show up to, for exams, for testing, and they don't do any of it, then, same thing.
Right. It's the same thing. I mean, I wish that doctors would understand that it's okay that not every person that walks in their door, they're going to have a magical relationship with. That's the assumption, right? See me for the first time. You're going to be the best patient ever. And sometimes they aren't. I remember when I had cancer, I had eye cancer, which is very rare, melanoma in my left eye. And after I had surgery and radiation, I started seeing an oncologist, as you do. And the first oncologist I went to said, honestly, I don't know why you're even coming in. If it spreads to your liver, you're dead. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be honest. You've got like less than 10% chance of living. So you can come in every 6 months if you want to, but it's just not going to do you any good. And I got my purse and I walked out the door and I never saw that doctor again. And I went to a different oncologist that said, you know what? There's some groundbreaking treatments. And if melanoma spreads, we're just going to deal with it one day at a time, and I want you to be optimistic and I want you to have joy in your life. And I was like, this is the doctor that I want. Right.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's up to us as patients to find the type of doctor that we're looking for. It goes two ways, but you have worked hard, especially if you're in private practice. You have earned the right to self-select patients that will listen to you and respect you. And I want to repeat that as many times as I have to. You don't have to be abused by your patients because they walked in your door, and, a lot of I have a pediatrician client who was like, if he feels very strongly in the middle of COVID about vaccines and that kind of thing. And if his patients are, want to converse with him about how they hate vaccines and they're evil and they've ruined America, he's like, this is not a good fit.
Yeah.
You need to find a different type of doctor. So, it's okay to have those conversations, and you're not going to, the scarcity model that, of life is a horrible place to live, because there's always this feeling of I can't say no to a patient. What if there aren't any left? What if I turn away all my patients? Really? Do you honestly think that there's going to be that many patients that piss you off? Probably not. A very small percentage. There's going to be more. There's always
They're
another
going to be
patient.
people.
That's true. Yeah. So
they're going to mess up your day. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's always going to be more patients. So if you let a few patients go here and there, and you just send them a nice letter and say it's just not a good fit. Now, it depends on the state. In Texas, you have to give them the 30 days notice of, make sure they have a medication refill. You don't want to abandon them. And that gets trickier if you're in the OBGYN space, for example, and they're, 9 months pregnant. You don't want to be like, you're out of here. I saw cocaine on your record. Cha-ching. You want to sort of hand that off and figure, maybe get to the birth and then to have them transition. So there are a few exceptions. But for the most part, at any time, give them 30 days notice and explain that you're not going to see them anymore. And, you can do it in a way that's kind and that doesn't end up in a blasting of, online reviews.
Leading a medical practice is challenging. There can be reimbursement changes, referral slowdowns, staff turnover, or drama. There are obstacles in the way of achieving your goals, or maybe it feels like you've hit a plateau. Who can you turn to for help with the business of managing a medical practice? The Physician Growth Accelerator, a private practice partner that helps you uncover and overcome constraints in your practice. They will check your business vitals, identify the root cause of what's restricting your growth, prescribe what to do about it, and help you achieve it, just like we do with our patients. Imagine your practice, where stress is reduced, profits increase, in both patients and staff, and you are happier. They've been making that vision a reality for over a decade. Isn't it time your practice thrived? Discover how at physiciangrowthaccelerator.com. I think we have to make the assumption that it's whatever letter you write is going to end up on all the town Facebook groups. A whole bunch of people are going to end up seeing it and reading it. So write it with that in mind. Kind of like if you're
Yes.
bait online with a troll, you're not writing it for the troll. You're writing it for the onlookers that are reading.
Yes.
That's your
Exactly. I say that all the time when I talk about bad online reviews. You're not, you always respond to negative reviews. Always. That's my mantra. You don't want to violate HIPAA, obviously, and put PHI on there, but always respond with something so kind. And we care very much about our patients. Here's our office manager's name. Please reach out to her. We want this to be right. You're not writing it for the person that's angry. They've got a personality defect. You're writing for every person reading it, that says, why, that office seems so kind and so wonderful. And they've got all these 5-star reviews and this one meanie, and then they, were so nice to him. So definitely think that, when you're writing that response, have someone look at it, have your lawyer look at it, have your office manager rewrite it, some way that tones it down for sure, because you don't even realize you're being defensive. That happens a lot.
There's one more example I want to ask about, and I can't remember if you brought it up or the person who suggested the topic brought it up, and that was divorced parents who don't agree on care
Oh,
and want to
don't get me
put you in the
started.
middle of it, or somehow you end up getting invited to a divorce hearing.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The bane of my existence, Bradley, is this scenario because I hear it so much. Okay,
Really?
so here, yeah, all the time. So this is what happens. Pediatrician, treats a kid. Mom and dad don't agree on vaccines. They don't agree on treatment. They don't agree on ADHD medicine, whatever it is. Then mom, calls the doctor, wants her opinion on it. Dad shows up to the office or calls and says, you will not do an interventional treat with my child. Then they send the divorce decree. Then everybody's mad. Then the family lawyers are calling and they want testimony. And the doctor's like, oh my gosh, I do not want to get embroiled in your legal dispute. I don't want anything to do with this. And of course, their first instinct is like, I'm terminating this whole family. Okay. But it's not the kid's fault, that the parents are at war. So many doctors are sensitive to that. They're like, the mom, maybe the mom is a terror and the dad's so nice or, whatever. I don't want to breach this relationship. I just don't want to be in the middle. And so I get involved a lot because they get subpoenaed for record. They get subpoenaed to testify. I often talk to the lawyers and I say, listen, here's the option. You either withdraw the subpoena or your kid's not going to have this amazing pediatrician because we'll terminate this family in a hot second. Okay, so there's that. You also don't want a hostile witness. You don't want this person showing up at trial pissed off that they have to be there, canceling an entire day of clinic to show up for your divorce matter. You're already, coming at it from batten zero. And so usually they relent. And if you can get your lawyer to argue that, they typically pull those down because they really don't want an angry doctor on the stand. But I've even had to file motions to quash because they wouldn't agree and we had to go fight the battle. And it's such a nightmare. And yes, it's not fair to the doctor to drop an entire day and reschedule patients because you people can't get along. It's terrible to put the doctor in that scenario. And that happens a lot. And sometimes it does result in at least a threat of terminating that patient. There was one, and they get nasty. These divorce cases are so, they're like pit bulls, caged animals ready to go at each other. And they don't care who gets hurt because they think they're fighting for their kid. And they're really just fighting each other. And the kid's put in the middle. I've had every scenario you can imagine about warring exes. I had one case where there were two moms and one of the moms was dating a man after they broke up. And the man allegedly showed his genitalia to one of the kids. And there was trauma and abuse allegations. And the other one was like, you're absolutely crazy. You're just jealous. See what I mean? This is not about the kids. This is about these adults that cannot get their crap together. And so that was a battle to try to say, we will not be in the middle of this. And sometimes it takes force, for your lawyer or your clinical manager to say, we will not, put the pediatrician or the doctor in the middle of your nasty lawsuit. And if you push us, we'll terminate this relationship. End of story.
For all the listeners out there, if any of you are on the other end of that situation and you're involved or thinking about getting a divorce, we do have episodes on that. So just look in the back catalog. It's called Physician's Guide to Divorce. So just throwing that out there. We do have some relevant topics if you find yourself unfortunately on the wrong side of that.
And sometimes you have to read the divorce decree, right? I mean, in one clinic was like, why are we in the business of reading divorce decrees?
Physicians, is the married couple.
Yeah, no, 100%. But sometimes the divorce decree itself is relevant and you have to understand it and read it because you don't know if they're joint managing conservators or if one has complete power and the other one doesn't, And if you get those documents and you read them, then you're like, oh, okay, well, the dad can squawk all day, but he doesn't have any rights, So it gives you a little more power to act in a certain way, in your business. So that's helpful. And it's, it's not fair that we sometimes have to get involved in it, but they're legal documents and you have to read them. Oh, I have another interesting one. So one time there was warring exes, right? Husband and wife that got divorced. And they decided to put in their divorce decree that this doctor was the tiebreaker, right? Like if they ever had an issue that she was like, I never agreed to that. What? Be the tiebreaker? That's a lot of pressure. That's they never even called me. I would never have said yes to that. So of course I went to the lawyers and I was like, you don't have any right to put this in this decree. And, she doesn't want to be your tiebreaker. And in fact, we'll terminate this relationship if you push this. And we had to go through all this drama. They had to remove it from the decree before the judge signed it. So lawyers will stick anything in there and they don't really always care about the doctor. I'm like a doctor's advocate, so all I care about is doctors. That's my world. But you've got to really be careful and don't ignore a subpoena. Because if you're a doctor thinking, oh, I got this subpoena, but I'm busy, and you just stuff it in a drawer, you can be held in contempt. So you have to answer them. You have to get out of them. You can't ignore them. And I think that's something that all doctors need to be aware of.
Is there clearly we've discussed this now at length, what would be in that situation a reasonable versus unreasonable offense specifically in the divorce situation. But can you think of any other examples of unreasonable offenses that patients have committed where you were like, you really can't fire a patient for that? They're being reasonable and maybe the doctor's being a little unreasonable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've had to talk, not sternly to my own clients, but listen, they have, they called, they didn't get an appointment. It was rescheduled twice. Of course they're upset. It's understandable. And you gave them the wrong medicine. And then you were like, oops, sorry. And then you had to reissue it. Whatever the problem is, it's how about we try to rehab this relationship and go extra on the nice, instead of firing them and making it worse. Because there are a series of events in the very best of practices where, just like Murphy's Law, one thing goes wrong, 5 things go wrong. And then all of a sudden, it always happens to the same patient. The doctor's late and then this happened and the medicine got mixed up. And so sometimes, and then there might be a case where they threaten, it's they've had it and they've threatened and it's an $80 bill. And the doctor's like, I'm not reimbursing that $80. And I'm like, yeah, you are. You're just going to go ahead and reimburse that $80 and you're going to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry there was a delay. It is not worth it. And sometimes they don't want to hear that. It's but it's not, pick your battles. This is not a toxic patient that's ruining your life, that's being awful to your staff. They got stuck in this horrible healthcare vortex that sometimes happens where everything got messed up and there was delays and it was really unfortunate. And how about just saying, I'm sorry, and we'd like to make it better. And so you can diffuse that easily. I think that doctors forget how much power they have. When you simply call a patient and you say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry that happened. Come in, let me see you. I won't charge you for it. Let me get you those labs. We'll make it right. And then patients are like, all I wanted to do is to be heard. I worked in a job once where I was the end of the line for angry people. I was the director of patient relations or something, title which meant everybody else tried to handle them. And they were so angry. They could, they bypassed all the managers. They got to me. I was the end of the line. And it was really interesting to sometimes just let them talk, what happened? And they would go on and on and on about all these things and all these maladies and all these wrongs. And sometimes just letting them speak it out and tell me all of the issues. And I would say, that sounds terrible. I'm so sorry that happened. That sounds really uncomfortable. I know that must be frustrating. And they're like, yes, it was. And just using that empathy, could diffuse the situation. And really at the end of the day, the only thing they really wanted is for us to waive a $30 lab. Okay.
So it sounds like, again, the gray area, the patient's being livid about something that totally unreasonable that happened to them versus being livid about something reasonable that happened to them. So who to interpret what the series of events that made them so angry was reasonable or unreasonable? And it seems to me, and again, I'm joking about this, there's this online place called, I think it's Am I the Asshole?
Right.
Where you can, I think it might be Reddit or something, where you can post a story and say, am I the asshole? And then you can let a whole bunch of strangers decide who in that situation is the asshole. Again,
I guess I was
don't do that. But the point being, run the situation by a third party and see if this person's being reasonable or unreasonable. And if they're being really unreasonable, especially if it's a recurring issue, there you've got a case. So then my next question is, if you do have a real case for firing this patient, what are the legal steps that are required? What's the paper trail that needs to be there?
Mm-hmm.
What's the notification that needs to be there? Do you need to involve legal counsel when doing something like this?
It depends. Some clients that have been around the block a few times don't involve me. Others are like, what do I do? How do I write the letter? What does it need to say? It's not really that hard. You write a letter to a patient and you explain that it's not a good fit and that you're going to refill their medicine until a certain date. And as of a certain date, they can't come see you anymore. And then, XOXO doctor. That's it. And if they need to get their medical records, you give them an opportunity to, say, if you would like for us to give us your medical records or forward them somewhere else, we would be happy to. So it's not a good fit, 30 days notice, medical records. That's kind of the key of any termination letter. Then you mail it to them. I always say mail it regular and certified because one of them is going to get there. Certified people just reject and say, I didn't get it. But if you mail it in regular mail, the old legal term of the mailbox rule we used to learn in law school is if it doesn't come back to you, you can presume that they received it. And so you print a copy, you put it in the chart, and you move on with your life. And sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes if you're a group, they'll come and try to squeeze in, like see you on the very last day and then want another refill, or they'll see another doctor in your practice and they'll try to get around it. And somehow they'll try to wait and come back in later as a new patient, So there are times if they're really, really a toxic patient, you might have to put something in the chart, to say like, this patient is not to be let back in as a new patient, and like a warning, like red flag. That's the rare occasion. But usually it's just send the letter, notify them, make sure they have their meds, that you're not abandoning them, and move on.
But when you're firing an employee, right, there needs to be a paper trail. You need to
that's different.
Build a case for them. So you're saying this is not like that.
This is not
like that. You don't need to include a note in the chart about the reasons you're doing it. You just
do it.
You just do it.
And the medical boards are overwhelmingly supportive. They understand that this is a relationship. Now, if there's a board complaint, let me just add this extra step. Let's say they file a medical board complaint against you, which, man, that nothing fires a doctor up worse than having a medical board complaint. Then you can actually go into the reasons. They were like, well, they dropped me without anything, and I didn't do anything about anything, and all of a sudden, they abandoned me. Then you go into the reasons. Oh, would you like to talk about Joe Smith? How he abused my staff?
It should be in the chart.
Not necessarily in the medical chart.
And also, you might not remember. And so that's why the documentation is, I think, going to be important, no?
Not necessarily in the medical chart. Sometimes you can keep a separate file if there has been like an incident report that you want to file. Like if they came and did something crazy, right? Like thought they had a gun or there was some incident, you can certainly write that up. But for the most part, I don't like to put a lot of that in the chart because later when a patient gets their medical record and they read a lot of this emotional stuff, that gets really inflammatory. So I actually don't like to see a lot of that in the medical chart, to be honest.
Okay.
And really the only thing, now you can do things like non-compliance, counseled patient, they indicated they weren't, that's clinical, that goes in the chart. But things like they were an asshole over and over and over to my staff, probably wouldn't put that in the chart. But I definitely would comment upon that. If the medical board, if they file a complaint against you, you can tell the medical board, this was not a good fit with our practice. They have had multiple altercations with their staff. They didn't agree with my treatment recommendations. It was very difficult every time they came in. That's something that I think you absolutely could tell the board.
Although there are ways to document it that might not be readily apparent to an observer. Like I can read one of my partner's charts and kind of read between the lines about what they really meant about
absolutely
about the patient. So I think, you can kind of skirt.
You can skirt that a little. I mean, you can say like, patient, mildly aggressive and seem to be combative. You can certainly comment a few things, but just be aware.
They might read it. And
they're going to read it.
Send them to litigation. Yeah.
This is the long time ago, like 20 years ago. I know I look so young, but when I was first practicing, there was a client that came to the doctor for a physical and he wrote that she was morbidly obese, which we all know is a clinical term, right? But she got her chart and she was, horribly offended that someone would call her morbidly obese, right? To her, that sounded like you were just calling her like a, demonic, horrible, nasty person. So she...
In defense of the patient, though, that adds nothing to the care. You can see their BMI in the chart. You don't need to include that qualifier also because it doesn't really add any information.
Well, that is a very good point. And I wish I'd have told that doctor back in the day. Why did you even write it? But anyway, he wrote it because his defense, he was like, well, she was morbidly obese. And that's what I thought I needed to write in the chart because, whatever. So she got so angry when she saw that in the chart that she wanted her records changed. She wanted edits made. She made major complaints. She was a bigwig in the town, very wealthy, just could not imagine that her records would be transferred somewhere with the word morbidly obese. It was a big deal. And so I just, like you said, if it's not that important to write those words, what is the purpose of a medical record? It's to refresh your memory, make sure that you document the care. Maybe there's other ways to say that. But yeah, patients are going to read their records. So if you say things like, he came in, he was very aggressive with staff, he's not agreeable, he nodded his head back and forth, he shook his finger at me, then it starts to look petty almost, and it doesn't really relate to the care. So
physical exam has a descriptor. It says slovenly. Like, who's going to click that box? Slovenly.
No one's going to click
that word in the vernacular.
You're a glutton, Mr. Jones. You're a glutton. I mean,
Okay.
It's definitely different when you're terminating staff members. I just want to highlight that very clearly. That is not the same. You don't just be like, I ain't putting this anywhere. Friday's your last day. See ya. You don't do that.
Yeah. The last question is going to be, because one of the things we're worried about is, that litigation. You're going to piss the patient off, and then they're going to sue you. They're going to report you to the medical board. But for some of these patients, you're doing it for noncompliance. You're doing it because it's not a good fit, not a good relationship. So does firing a patient increase or decrease your risk of litigation?
If you terminate them early when you see a problem, you're saving yourself. You really are. You're saving yourself a nightmare. The more you keep a patient, every doctor has that instinct, I think, from working with you guys for so long. That instinct where like something's not right, especially when that patient, that patient that comes in and they say things like this, like, I've talked to 7 doctors and no one has ever diagnosed this, but you are the person that is finally going to save me, right? You're like, oh, red flag. And
like
so
borderline personality disorder.
Something is wrong here.
Their fists clenched, and that you can see the artery in their temple is already pulsing as soon as they walk in the door. Like, they're like looking for a fight, or you're their savior. One of the two.
Or you're their savior, and you can't be their savior because they're never going to find a savior. So I think when you get those red flags early on, you document the crap out of the chart, and you might even think about, do I really want to go down this pathway? Because, it sometimes saves you to cut that early. That being said, it's hard to know when someone's really going to file a lawsuit. Lawsuits, I'm in Texas, so we have tort reform, so we're a little more blessed. There's not a lot of med mal cases anymore like there used to be. But it's an effort. It's a big effort to truly file a med mal claim. You have to get an expert. It's very expensive. You have to get a good lawyer. They don't take all the cases. So just because someone says, I'm going to get my lawyer, it's like, your cousin Vinny, like, who are you going to call? Okay, you're going to get a med mal lawyer that truly believes that you have actual damages, and they're going to get a real expert. It's remote, but the threat of board complaint is real. That you can just fill out online. It's just like a Yelp review. You just fill out So that I think is a bigger threat sometimes, because patients will say, if you don't refund my money, or if you don't do this, then this for me, it's extortion, basically. Then I'm going to go online. I'm going to blast you everywhere. I'm going to file a board complaint. And a doctor's like, what do I do? Do I give in to this terrorist? Do I just terminate them and hope for the best? Do I settle? And that is a judgment call. That's when you want to call your lawyer and say, okay, well, it's $1,000, but if it saves me the stress of worrying about this forever, maybe I just go ahead and form a severance, settlement agreement and make it done. And you always put in your settlement agreements that they have to have non-disparagement. They cannot talk about you online. There's confidentiality and all that. So I think sometimes it's valuable just to say, see you later, before it gets out of hand. And every doctor that I've dealt with is like, I knew that wasn't going right, but I just didn't have the heart to cut it off. So listen to that, especially when you get in middle end of your career, you're like, I do not have the energy or time to deal with this anymore. You're not starting out. You're like, I know, I've been here. I know these patients. And you can maybe do a warm handoff. Like, again, maybe I'm not the right fit for you. I'm only part-time. I think you need a full-time doctor, kick him down the road. I'm not your savior. Maybe that person is, And I get the sense of like, I don't want to pass on a problem, but you also have to save yourself. And it's a hard world, and don't make it harder.
A great way to end. It is a hard world. Don't make it harder. So fantastic legal advice from Amanda Hill. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
So if you're in Texas, of course, you can hire me as a lawyer, Hill Health Law. But my passion is helping doctors all across the country. So I have courses. In fact, one of them is called Dealing with Difficult People, where, you can just sign up for my online course, and I go through difficult partners, difficult patients, difficult colleagues, how to deal with sexual harassment. So I have a lot of online courses that I love to give to doctors, and I sell those online. So you can go to guardmypractice.com. If you want to get a hold of me, send me a note, and certainly find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for
You're
your
welcome.
time. Thank you for all you do for physicians.
You're welcome.
Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. you listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.